Okay, we have four different kinds of light source positions, and that is something to keep in mind as you're starting a painting. Where approximately is the light source coming from? And it'll help you to interpret visually what you see. Um, as you're looking at shadows and shading in the face, just to kind of be cognizant, where is that light source coming from? Especially if you have to make a change, you can do that when you have some knowledge of where the shadow might fall. But anyhow, we have four different kinds. We have the frontal, angled, side, and then rear. So let me show you these one by one. So here we'll start with the frontal light source. And again, that wonderful ball, here is an example of a frontal light source. And the reason we can tell it's a frontal light source is because most of the ball is illuminated by the light. Just like if you're thinking of this as a moon, this would be like would that be a gibbous moon they call it, where it's mostly illuminated. But you can see just a little bit of a shadow below, and the shadow right here, the cast shadow. So again, frontal light source. And let's see if I have an example of a photo of a person. Here we go. So you can see with this lady here, we have frontal light source. It's slightly above, but again, it's shining mostly from the front and a little bit to the left, but mostly from the front. They probably made use of actually two different light sources to even it out. As you can tell by the positioning of the reflection on her eye, it's coming a little bit from the left-hand side or her right side, but then seeing the secondary light here, which evens out the whole picture, it makes it as though it's coming from the front. So that would be an example of a frontal light source. If you're taking a candid picture of a person with your cell phone or digital camera, you're usually going to use a flash in dark settings, and that flash illumination is probably the best example of a frontal light source. The only disadvantage of that, it does tend to flatten out the picture. Here it's not as bad because with this we have probably two different lights, and it's professionally taken, so it kind of smooths out the shadows in her face. If you have true flash photography, you get very, very sharp shadows, and it tends to wash out the features of the face. But again, this would be your example of a frontal position of a light source. Okay, next would be your angled light source position. And again, with the ball, we have now the light coming from this direction. So the light source is to the left of the ball, slightly in front, but to the left, mostly just to the left, and shining down on it. And so we can see the shadow being cast going to the right because the light is coming from the left. And the hot spot or the highlight is in the upper left of the ball, slightly to the front. And so that again indicates where our light source is. And angled light sources are very interesting in portraits. If you're painting from a photo, you might not have a choice of what the light source is, but if you decide to take your own photographs for portraits, you'll have a lot of creative control over your light sources. And I think angled light sources look just beautiful in a portrait. But let's see an example of that. So here we have a portrait of this professional man, and the light source, although it's kind of diffused, is coming from the left. And I think you can see that as evidenced by the reflection on his eyeballs, which is on the left side. Also notice the shadow on the right side of his face, which is, obviously opposite of where the light source is. And it's casting a diffuse shadow onto his nose. They probably used some umbrellas and reflectors on the lights to diffuse it so the shadows weren't so sharp. But again, this would be an example of an angled light source. Okay,